Then speaking of the challenges, and I would sort of want to know, were there challenges you sort of encountered when you were applying, say, self-supervised learning or the pseudo labeling in your applications in Brainy?
Sure. So with the simple contrastive learning, so this algorithm that requires really lots of data and even 1 million images, I think it's not really easy to train that algorithm. And obviously at Brainy, we have more and we can train on more amounts of data, but also training takes a lot of time and projects has its constraints. And finally, we ended up that the pre-trained embeddings on the simple contrastive learning weren't really much better than just the pre-trained on ImageNet. And it was more about that task of choosing the candidates for labeling. The most important part was actually trying something simple like support vector machines on that pre-trained embeddings and retuning them with Bayesian optimization for hyperparameter search. And that worked well for the most difficult cases. So in general, for tuning the simple contrastive learning, I think it requires very much computational power, good way to distribute the algorithms, and also it requires pretty much big batch sizes from what I remember at the paper. They trained it originally on the bunch of TPUs, and the paper is, I think, from Google also. It's not as easy to reproduce everything what's on the TPUs with the size of you are constrained, for example, on the GPUs sometimes, in terms of the memory size and the batch size. So these are challenges I see there. In terms of pseudo labeling, it's kind of different. So usually you have a very small label data set. And if it's too small to learn the underlying cluster structure that can separate noisy but the initial examples, you just adding noise to your data when you're adding the more and more unlabeled loss coefficient when you increase that. The first problem could be a small labeled data set. The next one is, so when you do the pseudo labeling, you have that loss function that is weighted combination of the loss from labeled data and loss from the unlabeled data. And usually you start with the zero loss from the unlabeled data, and you'd like to warm up your neural network on the labeled data. And you could start increasing the loss function from the unlabeled too fast, for example, and it would, before it actually learns the cluster structure. Also, in neural networks, there is usually phenomenon of overconfidence. So the predictions are very close to 1, for example, or very close to 0. And especially when you do the pseudo labeling and the prediction obviously is sometimes incorrect, it also reinforces that phenomenon and adds even more noise to data. There's something called like confirmation bias then, and you need some techniques to tackle that. Usually it's done by applying mix-up strategy. So it's a strong data augmentation combined with label smoothing for regularization purposes. And that's something that can mitigate that confirmation bias.